Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And that brings us to a title which has been designated by Criterion at 1215, or spy number 1215. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 2000. And the name of the filmmakers are Béla Tarr and Ágnes Hranitzky. And the name of the work is, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language, but I hope you can forgive me, but it is WERCKMEISTER HARMONIES, or WERCKMEISTER Harmonies. This is the work, the phenomenal film, amazing, mesmerizing film, filled with so many points of provocation and challenging work, nuanced, also comic and absurd and strange, and also very haunting and hypnotic and quite scary and quite horrifying at some points. Work, a really tour de force film, film which is described as being from the year 2000, and the name of the filmmakers are Béla Tarr and Ágnes Hranitzky, and it has a phenomenal cast, included in which are Lars Rudolph and Peter Pitt and Hanna Schula, and we have also, this is the great music by Mihai Vig, and based upon the work by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. And this is the work, and please, once again, I'm so sorry, I'm very sorry, my pronunciation is terrible, I know, but I'm doing my very best. But the name of this work is WERCKMEISTER Harmonies, or as it's known for purposes of, say, this Criterion release, which is what I have in front of me, WERCKMEISTER Harmonies. And so, my goodness, WERCKMEISTER Harmonies is in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. This is amazing. This is really amazing. It is an amazing film, and we'll talk a little bit more about the contours of this Criterion release, which is right here. It's a 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo release, which means we have two discs, one for the 4K and then one for the Blu-ray, and so you can find the film on either or both, and we'll also have a discussion about the supplements on the Blu-ray, which we'll talk a little bit about later in this video discussion. But before we do, my dear friends, let's try to speak, if we may, about, or endeavor to speak about, the plot or story structure of this really fascinating film, WERCKMEISTER Harmonies. So if we now try to describe the plot or story structure, I mean, we are speaking about this small town area, small town or small village area, which is, we meet a number of people, in fact, almost immediately, in terms of the local settings or the bars or the streets or the walking. And I'm speaking in particular of János. This is the Lars Rudolph character, who becomes a kind of journey person, or the central figure in terms of our journey through this world of WERCKMEISTER Harmonies, because we follow him and his many journeys from one point to another in the context of this town community setting, and his relationships within this community with various people of the town, including, for instance, another main character, which is the Jurgi character. This is the Peter Fitz character, and their close relationship, a kind of a familial or quasi-familial bond between them, which also in turn gives us a little bit of subplot in terms of this elderly, slightly older generation, maybe a bit in terms of a sort of avuncular position, also a position of authority, the Peter Fitz character, and his subplots in terms of his own, say, philosophical and intellectual pursuits, thus giving rise to the name Werckmeister Harmonies, and the idea of the study of pursuit of music and the structure and basis and foundation of sort of the notes and harmonies, and trying to change or trying to develop or trying to discover a new, different alternative system from that which is currently the norm or the standard. And then also enveloped within that a type of further subplot or sub machinations involving Hanashigula character and some kind of maybe almost seemingly quasi or pseudo-political movements or machinations involving signatures and usurpation of power and also influence to try to um, to lead to a certain maybe municipal or government based decision making process, etc. So these details are these details are shown to us, but also there's aspects that are quite unknown to us, because we're not quite sure what's going on. We're not seeing things from the viewpoint of, say, the municipality body, or we're not necessarily seeing things from the viewpoint of, say, the Tunde character, György character, the Peter Fitz character, and Hanashigula character, and their relationship, etc. We see things primarily from the viewpoint of the János character, our main character, the Lars Rudolph character. In which case, therefore, all these points about subplots and subplots within subplots, we hear about through his experience, the Lars Rudolph character's experience. But like him, we too, I think, are found in a state of maybe half understanding and perhaps half being perplexed. And I mean that in a very complimentary way. And I mean that also in a way that puts us in a position of being somewhat maybe on edge, slightly off kilter, off balance type of feeling like we are in a place that feels familiar, but also there's a sense of lack of familiarity as well, maybe a sense of being somewhat alienated because certain things that maybe are symbols of things that we might understand, the room of the uncle, or the workplace, or the post office, or the streets that are being walked by people like János and others every single day. These things that are symbols of the familiar, of the aspects of the environment and ambience that are known to us and that are intimately known to us because we know about them every single day. These are also being intruded upon by aspects and details that might seem unknown to us or to the Lars Rudolph character, János character. Things that might seem just off off in the distance, or maybe off, maybe beyond the frame of the camera, maybe not shown directly to us or to Lars Rudolph character himself, such as the situation involving this couple, or such as the situation involving maybe the introduction of other aspects of the town, certain relationships that are formed and are affected by certain events that are raised in the town that are maybe directly within the purview of János' own direct experience, and maybe outside that direct experience. And then I bring there the point about another very key aspect of this film, which is the introduction of this traveling circus or carnival show of sorts, which we kind of see, but we kind of don't see, which is, again, that part of that aspect of this film, which is showing us certain aspects, but also leaving other aspects to our imagination, because we are also left, like János, we are left in a position of knowing but not knowing, being familiar with certain things, but then also being confronted by things that are completely alien and foreign to us and unknown to us. And perhaps that leads to a sense of fear, and also fright, and also horror and chaos, as well as maybe a confrontation about what indeed those symbols of what we were, what confronted, are of the symbols of what we thought were things that we understood. Maybe those symbols that comforted us and that gave us solace before, things that we thought we knew, maybe were indeed, at the very end of the day, things that, much like many other things of the unknown, things that we never knew to begin with. And so it becomes this perhaps cynical way of viewing the world. But just returning to this idea of the external and the traveling circus or the traveling carnival show, here we have other aspects of the mysterious, which is the show that seems to involve some kind of prince figure who may or may not be someone that we are directly privy to. So the prince figure seems to be someone that is adopting a growing sense of maybe authority, at least an esteem, at least in our eyes and our estimation, and perhaps the estimation of those of Janos and the rest of the community, who are unaware of the inner machinations of the goings on of the circus carnival troupe. But also maybe there is something sinister or something not quite right afoot. We're not quite sure. Add on to that aspects of this situation involving some kind of authoritarian or maybe even quasi-military control. There's also something involving a whale that is part of that is in confinement, that is also part of the show in a certain manner of speaking, in its, I think, haunting, graceful and yet grotesque manner in which it seems to be presented, and quite absurd, wildly absurd way that it's being presented. And we see part of that in terms of the cover art image here, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So we are also, and Lars Rudolph's character and others, we are being confronted with images that seem totally random, totally wildly absurd. And so they might be familiar in settings of, say, the sea or the ocean, whales swimming in the sea or the ocean, but to be in the setting of this rural town, in the context of the carnival or the traveling troupe, and it being stuck in this huge crate to be displayed, or to be for people to parade through or walk through. This itself seems very out of place, and very curiously out of place, and quite frighteningly so, and things that we as viewers maybe are not used to, or we are being confronted just to try to grapple with its meaning. This is an example, too, of what I was trying to refer to before, which is things that seem to be known to us, but also at the same time are not known to us. Images that might seem familiar, but also placed in a given context might seem frighteningly out of place, and thus frighteningly beyond one's comprehension, at least at face value. Thus, I think, confronting us with the possibility of all those images that we see in a way that might give us a sense of solace or comfort might themselves be hiding the fact that they are indeed as alienating as any other face value alienating thing that we might see confronting us in this film. Thus, I think, creating the sense of foreboding, thus creating a sense of ever questioning, and thus creating a sense of always trying to get a sense of what it is we are experiencing as being really part of our intimate experience, or perhaps that intimate experience is itself just a dream or a fallacy, or something that is maybe even hauntingly beyond our grasp, and maybe something that is just a figment of our imaginations. And when we see how the plot parades in a very brilliant way from certain aspects of Janos's experience involving, as I say, other people that he meets, other people of the community that he meets, and how the community itself seems to be reacting, maybe in terms of not knowing, or perhaps not being clear about who certain figures are, who the prince is, what the troops' motivations are, to certain reactions that might turn violent and quite chaotic. There are some scenes involving communal action and rioting, and even a kind of a violent uprising of sorts. There's also a way in which we can see images that might be suggesting a counter revolt or counter reaction, authoritarian in nature. And also we might see aspects that involve a sense of a type of political menace, or maybe a type of scapegoating that seems to be going on, or maybe a hunt or witch hunt, in a manner of speaking, which might have social, political, cultural ramifications that is suggestive of a type of collective conscious understanding of social, political, geopolitical dimensions of the 1990s into the 2000s. And as well as being a film about the individual and the system, in the context of Lars Rudolph's character and his way of trying to deal with various points of say, intuition and understanding on an intuitive and a beautiful level on the one hand, while also trying to confront ideas that might be said to be wanting to quash those pursuits of, say, individual freedoms. And I draw your attention to a number of beautiful points of, say, individual freedom being expressed in a wonderful lyrical and quite earnest way in this film, such as the story of Jurgi and Werckmeister, and the Werckmeister harmonies in question, and the pursuit of something else, something alternative. That is a kind of life passion of intellectual pursuits. Also, we see this introduced to us at the very outset of the film with regard to the way that the celestial bodies and the planets and astronomy are being told in this wonderful passage in the bar setting, involving people being asked to stand in and turn in place, much like a dance in the middle of a bar room. But they're, instead of dancing, what they're moving to, or they're dancing to, is the instructions to act in a certain way, like moving planets in orbit, to present a kind of fable or story-like tale that's also very much like a science lesson, while also seemingly a kind of group or communal session, which is conducted much like a musical conductor by Lars Rudolph himself. And so this becomes, in its own way, a kind of symbol or a kind of expression, if you will, of the beauty of the story and the fable and storytelling, and also the sort of intellectual pursuits, as well as a kind of respect or presenting us in the context of this barroom setting, which itself is, I think, a stand-in or representation of that which is the wholesome communal aspect of this work, on the one hand, while also at other parts giving us a kind of violent underbelly, or a sort of antithetical other side of the coin, where we see other points where the community is acting, but in ways that seem to be very violent and very in a very type of violent throng and violent uprising way that leads to, I think, further violence, which is suggested, or which is suggested to us through certain passages of the film itself. But and then how the authority then cracks down or meets that type of violence upon violence. So there are aspects of, say, the way in which sort of communal expressions and intellectual fervor, and also the independently fueled spirit of, say, these sorts of pursuits, told in the fable or story setting, or told in the setting of a type of independent fierceness of thought, a passionate thought, or told in the setting of sort of the journey person, way in which Lars Rudolph's character is seen walking from place to place, journeying from one place to another, a kind of on a mission from going from one place to another, trying to be on a quest from to understand, starting from one place and ending up in another place. These have the potential of being a type of earnest storytelling fairy tale fable. It has aspects of the inspirational, but at the same time, we are being confronted within the very fabric of that film. We are being confronted with aspects of the unknown and the crisis and the chaotic, intruded upon our scene by, say, the external forces within the plot that I alluded to as well, which also might in turn stand in for a kind of broad social political commentary taking place within, say, an understanding of the rise and fall of the dynamics and social political structures of communism into the 1990s, into the 2000s, and then what it lies in wake of that, and then also how social structures and also how community structures broke down or maybe reacted to such sudden transformations or shifts or changes, and how that might have affected people on an individual level, both in terms of what they thought their own perceptions of themselves were, in the context of, say, Lars Rudolph's Janos character, what he thought he knew in terms of his world versus what he doesn't know, and how what he doesn't know seems to be invading or intruding upon that which he does know, thus creating this whole sense of confusion that by the end of the film, when we finish the film, we are left wondering, I think, or I'm left wondering, was it all stuff that was totally unknown to him, or maybe were there things that were really there, that were intimate and important to him, that were eroded or destroyed by that which was unknown, or perhaps the things that were known to him won out in the end. I mean, there's a sense of ambiguity about kind of on a subconscious level about identity and about one's place. And that is a very frightening prospect, especially when we are given, as I say, an element or setting that, again, seems very familiar, seems very much part of the milieu of things that are known to us. You know, the bar and the home and the streets that we walk every day. When these are intruded upon by aspects of the chaotic and grim, maybe best symbolized by the whale itself. You know, I think that becomes a very challenging, provocative thing, and thus maybe just putting us on edge, shifting our balances afoot, and leaving us stranded, much like you know, a whale being stranded itself, either on shore or perhaps in the black and white photographed streets of this communal town somewhere in the world. It is a very haunting film, and one that I think begs for a lot of maybe reading or interpretation, or at least invites that. But I would say that it's a work that it seeps into one's pores, and it can be, I think, something that can be appreciated and enjoyed on a very intuitive level, on an emotional level. You know, when I first saw this film, and even when I watch this film now, you know, I don't claim to have any kind of deep knowledge of, say, social political history of the 1990s and 2000s of Europe and Hungary. I know a little bit, but I don't know, I'm not an expert or scholar, but I can read the film in that in that lens or through that context based on my own understanding, as a type of maybe shift in systems that we see in this film, the way that the shift in systems seems to upend certain parts of the community, such as Janos and such as others, where certain maybe elements of a kind of authoritarian or counter-authoritarian impulse seems to be intruding in a way that is invisible yet quite impactful on certain daily lives and the aspects of one's daily lives. A sort of invisible hand of something that seems to be counteracting that which was the old order. The new order itself being perhaps, maybe, who knows, just as authoritarian. Again, the questions are left to one to answer when we watch the film. But those readings, I think, are very possible, as well as a reading of this film in terms of the storytelling aspect, you know, how metaphors are used, how symbols are used in a work that I think is confronting us with images and places and ideas that on its surface seem quite random and quite out of context with the rest of the context and the environment of the film. But we can then think about those and either accept them as face value, or try to consider a type of simile or metaphor or symbolism, or perhaps a hybrid of the two. And I think in that way, in either reading, I think we are left with a really rich and potentially rewarding experience with this film, because if we look at those symbols in terms of face value, in terms of the purely absurdist, the purely random, and thus that leads to this idea that things are chaotic in this world. And if things are truly chaotic in this world, then the outcomes of that chaos are, I think, quite cynical and quite grim indeed, leading us to a certain way in which we can read or interpret the denouement of this film, Werckmeister Harmony. So I think that is a very powerful reading in itself. You know, things are random, and at face value, they have no meaning. Or perhaps they do have some kind of underlying meaning, things standing in for something else. And what that something else is could be tying in back to this idea of a cynical view of the world, or maybe a world through the socio-political, a geopolitical lens of reading this film. Or it could be a kind of journey, person, or quest type of story. Joseph Campbell type of quest that is embedded in this film, thus symbols standing in for challenges, or the way in which our heroes need to overcome these various challenges, you know, in this very fundamental storytelling, fable, fairy tale like way. And in that way too, I think this film invites a lot of wonderful and very rewarding experiences in terms of engagement or interaction, because we can see how the storytelling aspects really seep into the world and mind of Lars Rudolph and his journey through the film. I mean, the way in which he interacts with, aspects of, say, uh, uh, um, um, concepts of science and astronomy, or how he interacts with other people who are trying to deal with notions of music and art in this film, or the idea of art and entertainment in and of itself, with the traveling troupe aspect. This, I think, becomes a really potentially inspiring or optimistic view of the film Werckmeister Harmonies. And then just seeing how these forces might sometimes be so compelling as to be overpowering the individual status. And so there's a kind of nuance or ambivalence even in that possibly optimistic reading of this film Werckmeister Harmonies. But then also we can see too that maybe there are moments where we can just intuit or just feel the emotion of a work, while not necessarily needing to attach a specific, say, meaning to this or to that. Sometimes we can just enter into a situation where, I mean, I think about my own life, just outside watching the film, and I think how I don't understand everything that happens to me in my life. I walk into a room. I don't claim to understand everything, every nook and cranny of what's happening in that particular room, because I can't. I don't have that frame of reference. I don't have that knowledge. So there are things that are always unknown to me, even in my daily goings on in my own life. So that is to say too that even when I watch a film, Werckmeister Harmonies or elsewhere, I can accept the fact that there will be moments within the frame, within the scene, within the sequence that will be totally beyond my grasp, both emotionally and intellectually. There will be things that I will not be able to understand, or I can't quite know what it means on a type of intellectual level. But that's not to say that I won't be able to react to it. So I can react to something on a gut level. I can react to something on a way that can hit me, or that can maybe strike me in a certain way, this way or that. And I feel that every single moment when I watch Werckmeister Harmonies. I feel that just through the way that the light and shadow pass as he is walking down a nightly lit street, or how the music maybe creeps in or invades and then suddenly recedes in a way that is like smoke or fog in the air. And it's a really overpowering and brilliant score indeed. Or when when the film cuts to, say, a seemingly random moment of two characters that maybe we haven't seen before, maybe we will never see again, but there seems to be this moment of intimacy that is unspoken, but we can understand or intuit on a gut level immediately that there is some kind of love or intimacy between these two people that we otherwise might never see again. Or we might get wind of certain motions or movements of, say, people in the crowd, or maybe people who are within rooms that we will never see again, or maybe images of someone young or old that are just given to us, that seem to be perhaps given to us maybe out of context on the one hand, or maybe within meaning. The context has always been there, but maybe it's not quite there for us when we watch the film, especially upon a first-time watch. But that's okay, because it is what we feel, and what we can glean from that feeling, I think, is also part of the point, at least for me, when I watch Werckmeister Harmonies. I mean, I have seen this film so many times, and I think I know what the film is telling me on one stage, but then I watch the film again, and I see quote-unquote random images that just throw me totally off. But I think about them, and the film lets me linger upon them and lets me ponder them. And it's through that activity that allows me some kind of emotional, gut feeling link with the film. And that happens a lot. And that then in turn lets me question, how do I feel that way? Or why do I feel that way? Maybe it's going back to how I might think I might be reading this film in a social political way, or maybe in a kind of journey person quest type of way, or storytelling fable type of way, or maybe another way that's not known to me at the time. But it's those images as well that I think populate a work like Werckmeister Harmonies, and indeed other works when we're talking about Hranitzky or Béla Tarr, maybe beyond or in other parts of their filmographies. But I think Werckmeister Harmonies operates so brilliantly in that realm, as well as these other realms, thus making it very compelling and incredibly charged and mysterious and maybe frustrating as well. But I think that frustration is important because it also potentially invites further rewatch. And I think that's the key to this film, at least for me, is just watching it again and again and again, and seeing how it, not necessarily needing to know everything, but also feeling like I know. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's much like what I was alluding to at the very start of this discussion, which is, how information is given to us, but how other parts are not given to us. We know things, yet we don't know things. Things are shown to us, but things are also withheld from us in order to leave a lot to our imagination. So it's much like that in terms of my own feeling as well. I know things, yet I don't know things. I think I understand things, yet I realize I don't understand things. So there's always this constant divide, this constant clash between the knowing and not knowing. But that's okay. That's okay, because I think that's what the film is designed to be, at least in terms of my experience. I think it feels really sharp and elegant and graceful and organic, as well as always being punctuating, always being very piercing, and always being quite provocative, uh, and always making me wonder, while also giving me a sense of the optimistic, but also being very cynical. I mean, it's this clash of contradictions that makes works like Werckmeister Harmonies so powerful and so compelling indeed. And I should say too that I saw this film for the first time many years ago. And it was my first foray into one of my first forays into the world of Hranitzky and Tarr. And there is a way in which the filmmaking prowess of this work, Werckmeister Harmonies, how it shows through the passage of time and how the camera is focusing in on these what are known as very in terms of the takes, in terms of the edit, how the edits seem to be timed in a certain way, or the way that the length of a shot can be a certain length of time, etc. I think that has an effect in terms of allowing us to ponder and to consider these images, right? Again, things that we don't know, but when we are given the time and space in terms of the length of the shots and the way the camera glides through the space, when we're given the space to consider, then it is left lingering in our minds, or my mind anyway, and I'm left thinking, how do I feel about this? Even if I don't quite know exactly what's going on, how do I feel about this? And I think that is a very beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing. I mean, it goes to the strength of what one of the famous things about this film is, and indeed the other works by Hranitzky and Tarr, Béla Tarr, is the length of the shots and the length of the film itself. I think this becomes part of its grace and part of its strength in allowing us to ponder, which I think is a really powerful thing. So it's a really great film. I like this film immensely. This is the work which is Werckmeister Harmonies. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Werckmeister Harmonies, this year, 2024, at spine number 1215. And what I have here is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, which means that we have the film on the 4K UHD disc, and we also have the film on the Blu-ray disc. So there are two discs, the 4K UHD disc and the Blu-ray disc, with the supplements, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to be found on the Blu-ray disc. So, but before we get to the discussion of the Blu-ray disc supplements, let me speak about the film itself and how it looks here. I happen to have in the player behind me, I have the 4K disc in the machine running. The menu, the disc menu, is one of these wonderful moving images montages of shots from the film as well. But what I've done is just to be safe in terms of the YouTube copyright rules and guidance. I just, for purposes of the video, I've just blocked it out. So I apologize for the bad aesthetics of my video making skills. I apologize for that, but I hope you can understand. I just don't want to. Just be sure that the YouTube copyright gods are happy. But please note it is a very great disc menu. And let me see here. Oh yes, I've also removed from the release here, prior to the start of recording this video discussion, the insert, which is one of these fold out poster things. You fold it like this and you unfold it and it reveals a poster of the art on the one side, and then on the back side it has the writing and essay and information about the casting crew and the master, which we'll talk a little bit about later. I'm not a fan of this type of fold-out format. The writing is great, and the poster art itself is really amazing, which we'll talk about later. But I wish the Criterion I wish Criterion would do the staple booklets for these, because they're stapled and they have many pages and it's robust, a wonderful reading experience. But I don't want to take away from the great essay, Dark Side of the Earth, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But the reason why I bring it up is there's a little note on the right-hand side of the back part of the poster fold-out about the master, and I quote, "Supervised and approved by director Béla Tarr, the new master presented here was created from the 35mm original camera negative, which was scanned and restored in 4K resolution by the National Film Institute Hungary and Cinegril. The original monaural soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm original soundtrack negative." Okay, so I have to say that this looks and sounds absolutely stellar based on my own subjective experience and watches of this film. I might have said it earlier on in this video. I saw this film many years ago, fairly early on. And at the time, it was a little bit difficult to be able to watch at the time in terms of its accessibility. But I was able to watch it, and it was an incredible experience, absolutely incredible experience. I admit then I didn't know a lot about the filmmaking style and how to read this film, and indeed I don't know now how best to read this film because of my very shallow knowledge base and my lack of intellectual curiosity. But as a film going experience, seeing it before, it was really amazing. But I have never seen it quite so sharp, and I've never seen it quite so in this very lovely way that it has a kind of diffuseness of its power. The way that it looks here is really quite amazing to me. It is a work from 2000, so there is a way it does feel modern within its black and white photography aesthetics, and I think that's doesn't take away anything of its power, and I mean that in a very complimentary way. It feels like a film that was made, say, within the last 20 years, which to me is a very modern film. There's a certain crispness to the black and white photography, which I think works very well, because what it does is it allows for a kind of maybe for me anyway, when I think about the crisp black and white photography, and the sharp delineation of lines per se. And then also on the one hand, but also there are moments where there's a kind of softness between how light and shadow seem to interact with each other. That is itself, in a visual representation, what I feel this film does for me in terms of on and off, turning on and off, knowing and not knowing, understanding and not understanding. In a visual representation, I think that is, to me, perfect, absolutely perfect. And so that's why I've always loved the black and white photography here. And that type of black and white photography experience is, I think, preserved and enhanced even when I watch this film. And I noticed no, say, maybe extreme to one end or the other. It felt like that type of uneasy balance between knowing and not knowing, the sort of the softness and the harshness. I felt it was preserved here. And it was also done in a way that was very direct as well. So I love that. I absolutely love that. And also the soundtrack there's a way in which it still feels very overpowering, and then it has a kind of way of receding at just the right moment. So again, knowing and not knowing, being present and then being absent, understanding and not understanding. So I love how the music seems to be also very much part of that. And just once again, Mihai, the score here is one of the most exceptional things, really beautiful things, and we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about the supplements. But overall, this is to me a really brilliant presentation experience. As I watched the film on the 4K, and it looked and it sounded really great in the way that I was speaking about. And then I watched the film again on the Blu-ray, and it felt in a very similar way. I felt like none of the power was lost when I experience it on that format. So I don't think there will be any. I don't think there will be any issues on that front, at least for as far as I can, as far as anything that I could identify. I don't think there would be any issues in terms of watching this in terms of the 4K or the Blu-ray. I think for me, each was a really brilliant and wonderful and bold experience as it was overall being presented here for purposes of the Criterion release. So splendid job. I'm very impressed indeed. And now what I've done is I've removed the 4K disc from the machine, and now I've put the Blu-ray disc into the machine. And we have also the same disc submenu, or the disc menu, with the moving images and the montage of clips. So it's really great representation of the film. But once again, please pardon the appearance of my YouTube video editing skills. Again, just for purposes of not upsetting the YouTube copyright gods. But I have the Blu-ray here because now I'd like to speak about the supplements that can be found included with this Criterion release. Once again, we have the 2 discs, the 4K UHD disc with the film, and then the Blu-ray disc, which is what I have in the player, with the film. But the Blu-ray disc will have the supplements, the 4K disc will not. So just keep that in mind, which is, I think, pretty much in keeping with how Criterion does its 4K Blu-ray combo discs releases up to now. You know, the supplements will be found on the Blu-ray disc, but you can watch the film either on the 4K or on the Blu-ray disc. So we have it here for WERCKMEISTER Harmonies Criterion release. So I press the supplements menu, and here's what I get. I get three supplements, which is, and it says here, Interview with Béla Tarr, then Family Nest, and then Trailer. So let me just get this out of the way. This might seem to be, in terms of quantity, in terms of the number of supplements, it might seem to be on the low side. And I think there could have been other things that I would have loved to have seen in terms of supplements. It would have been great to have seen maybe an introduction, some other aspect or avenue in terms of a discussion of WERCKMEISTER harmonies, maybe a way in which we could have a primer into, say, Béla Tarr and László Krasznahorkai. We get a little bit of that in the interview, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is a brilliant interview, by the way. But it would have been, or a commentary track, that would have been nice to have seen, but we didn't quite get that. So this might therefore seem to be lacking in terms of quantity, in terms of number. And if you feel that way, I think it's a very legitimate criticism to have. So please keep that in mind. Now, with that being said, let me now speak to what we do have. And I do want to emphasize here that what we do have is really amazing. It's very amazing, and I'll try to explain why I feel that way. So first off is Interview with Béla Tarr. And I press it, and it gets me to the submenu explanatory note, and I quote, "In this 2023 interview by film critic Scott Hondas, director Béla Tarr discusses beginning his career in the face of government resistance, the evolution of his work, and his decision to leave feature filmmaking behind." This is a one-on-one discussion between the two of them, so discussing Béla Tarr, and it's wonderful to see, just to hear and to see Béla Tarr and the rhythms and cadences of his voice, and he's very, his pace is, it's wonderful. He takes his time and he chooses his words carefully, and yet he's also very direct and outspoken. And there are moments where he's very, very direct to the point of being refreshing. It's refreshing and wonderful, brilliant, wonderful in the discussion with Béla Tarr here. um, in terms of getting a sense of the artist, who the artist is. And for people who are maybe watching works of Béla Tarr for the first time, and maybe if you're, this might be the first time for some of you to see Béla Tarr actually speaking in an interview like this. I think it's a really great representation of who I understand Béla Tarr is as an artist and as a filmmaker. So I enjoyed this immensely. So I hope you do as well, because he speaks here about the types of films that he likes to make. I think they acknowledge here that maybe there might be a difference between, or how he might react to, quote unquote, films in the mainstream, end quote, and maybe how he he tried to craft or formulate his own works, and his own kind of statements on rhythm and timing and the length of shots and the length of the film itself and the revelation of information or the withholding of information and the way that the camera glides through that space, which is a very provocative way of engaging with space and time and story and politics. But he's also acknowledging a type of almost a he an agent provocateur sensibility in a sense, which is also very refreshing and very funny and quite liberating. He mentioned something about in his dreams he doesn't just knock on the door, he likes to kick the door down. So it's self-acknowledgement of type of provocateur aspect of his filmmaking, which I think also is very apropos, both in terms of the way one can read Werckmeister Harmonies as well as one can read other films in his filmography, such as something else which we'll talk about in the supplement, which is a work known in English as Family Nest. But before we get to that, he does talk here about his filmmaking inspirations or filmmakers that he saw growing up, or as he saw into his early adulthood life. Vertov he mentions, Troel he mentions, Tarkovsky he mentions here. He mentions also getting an 8mm camera for his birthday, and understanding how the camera could be something that could change the world. Let me say that again. The camera could be something that could change the world. So I think that's a really powerful statement. I think it's one of the most brilliant statements I've heard from any filmmaker artist. So, and it's just so on point. And you can take that for whatever you think that means. If it's a socio-political meaning, fine. If it's on a purely artistic meaning, fine. Or maybe it's a combination of the two or something else, that's fine. I think it has so many malleable facets to it. But the camera can change the world in the hands of Béla Tarr. My goodness, I love that statement so much. And then they go into a discussion of the film, which is Family Nest, which is a feature film, and this was made when they discuss it when Béla Tarr was in his early 20s. I think they mentioned he was 22 at the time, and how the film itself was made. And we'll talk about Family Nest a little bit later in this supplement discussions, because it's part of the supplements here with the Criterion release, which is an amazing supplement, by the way. But it's a little background about how it was made in terms of the script, or no script as the case may have been, but there was a lot of improvisation of scenes from the actors themselves, taking a lot from maybe their own experiences or the experiences that they knew from others, because it's a story about the family dynamic that is affected by housing or lack of housing, government making government housing available, or the relative lack of availability, and socio-economic concerns, as well as how it affects the family dynamic, the dynamic between couples and parents and children and in-laws, etc., and also how it affects one's own ideas and understandings about who we are and who I am, and how or how they feel themselves, and how it may be something that is quite a sense of discouragement, or a sense of feeling totally broken by certain rules of the system, for lack of a better phrase. So, and also the way in which labor working class and labor scenes of uh, um, people in doing hard labor in some instances. I think is shown in a way that has a way of being part of the everyday, but also part of this overall fabric of the socio-political discussion. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we get to the film itself, but it is part of the package of this release. And it also is a way in which the two of them here speak about how this was something that really gave Béla Tarr a lot of prominence within the national film industry scene, especially before, when he and his colleagues didn't get a lot of support, but when the film garnered a lot of praise and attention on the international film festival circuit, it was as though the national film industry had no choice but to pay attention to this new voice of film, Hungarian film, that was Béla Tarr and others. And so there is a discussion here about the films that took place immediately after this and the growing filmography. And also working, and how these films also led the way to his working relationships, his artistic and personal relationships with other very key figures in his filmography and in his career. So Ágnes, Hranitzky, and Laszlo Krasznahorkai, and Mihai Vig. So these collaborators and their partnerships form a real crucial point that lead into what ends up becoming Werckmeister Harmonies, because then that leads to a conversation about encountering the writings of Laszlo Krasznahorkai, and how the plan was to maybe collaborate with Krasznahorkai to make a film based upon the work Szétán Tango at the time. What ended up happening was, due to certain circumstances, they couldn't make Szétán Tango at the time, but it led into collaborations, and that leads into this area of Béla Tarr's career with films in English, films known in English as Damnation, and then Werckmeister Harmonies. And then, of course, Szétán Tango will be a film that will be discussed later in the Béla Tarr cinema journey. It's another fascinating work if you haven't seen it, Szétán Tango. But now I think pretty readily available on other non-Criterion labels. It's really, it's one of the most brilliant works, absolutely brilliant works. It could be my favorite of the works of Béla Tarr, but that's a discussion for another day, perhaps. But not to take anything away from the brilliance of Werckmeister Harmonies, mind you, because this is also this is one of the greats, really one of the greats. But speaking of Werckmeister Harmonies, then the discussion here turns to a discussion of Werckmeister Harmonies, again, in the context of working with Laszlo Krasznahorkai, and then the other artists that he partners here with, Hranitzky, of course, Mihai Vig, the great music of Mihai Vig as well. And there is a way in which I think the discussion then turns to how we can read works like Werckmeister Harmonies and Szétán Tango and others, but Werckmeister Harmonies, how can we read a film like this, and how can we connect them with early films? Because on the surface, perhaps it can be said that a film like Family Nest and then a film like Werckmeister Harmonies, they might seem like quite different beasts. But in fact, I think the discussion here really wonderfully suggests certain connections that were ever present even in the early days of Béla Tarr's filmography career, such as the way that space and time are used, such as we seem to be getting a sense of the passage of time in a way that seems to be capturing a moment of the quote-unquote real, or the sensibilities of realism. That also could be affected here in Werckmeister Harmonies, thus giving us a sense of the quote-unquote sensibilities of realism within the long shots of Werckmeister Harmonies, even though we might be confronted with images within those shots of Werckmeister Harmonies that themselves might seem to be completely absurdist or completely surreal, which I think is a really key point that is given here quite boldly, very well. So the sensibilities of sensing time within the scope of Béla Tarr's films here, quite wonderful. And then also too, the way in which the film was constructed and made, in terms of its planning, in terms of a script that was there, in order to essentially show the authorities, or to raise money, or to show potential investors, etc. But when it came time to making the film, the script wasn't relied upon, at least according to Béla Tarr here. So it was essentially creating the film, much like the way in which they described earlier how the earlier film Family Nest was made in terms of essentially improvisation, so or the way kind of leading a sense of guided through intuition from a certain degree anyway. And so that meant that the work of Hranitzky was also very critical in terms of co-directing, but also being on set as well. And please, the editor is Hranitzky for this film as well. So that means that Hranitzky's presence on set was critical in order to understand what shots were being shot in order to then be able to fashion them in terms of the editing process. And there's also this point about getting these long takes down. They are very, very intricate in a lot of places with a lot of people sometimes involved in these takes. So it's a really quite potentially laborious process in terms of filmmaking. So it's one of those brilliant little anecdotes, or big anecdotes, if you will, about the filmmaking prowess of Hranitzky and Tarr. Really quite remarkable indeed. Also, then they talk about certain choices of casting. And this leads to the brilliant casting of Lars Rudolph as our main character, Janos' character. Lars Rudolph is perhaps the make or break aspect of this film, at least how they describe it, and I can totally understand why. Béla Tarr describes Lars Rudolph as having a same or similar type of a type of similar in character to that of our main character in the film. I think that helped them in terms of Béla Tarr describes himself as being a director, not necessarily always being on set and coaching the actor or telling the actor what they need to think or do per se, but also just relying on what it is they know about the character because it's very much close to them, either in terms of similarity or perhaps in terms of shared personal experience, whatever the case may be. But that, I think, type of intuition that seems to be part of the Béla Tarr Hranitzky, Ágnes Hranitzky aesthetic, I think is so brilliant and fascinating and so inspirational. Even for someone like me, I'm not an artist, but a non-artist person like me, I find so much inspiration in hearing how a work of art like WERCKMEISTER Harmonies is being made here. A lot of it, there's a lot of preparation and planning, of course, but there's also a lot of that feeling and intuition that is relied upon, which is so beautiful. And so that spontaneity is very important, and there's a discussion here about a dance, how certain very famous scene very early on at the beginning in terms of people spinning in a bar and pretending to be planets in the solar system. How this is itself a kind of dance number. So this film adopts various, say, multifacets about it. It's science, fable, fairy tale, community, dance, and the like. That's really quite wonderful. And then also just to lean into that a bit, Béla Tarr is also as mentioning how he does like to rely on spontaneity. So there wasn't too much in terms of the rehearsal process going on here. And then too, another one of the artistic collaborators that was mentioned earlier was the collaboration with that of Mihai Vig. And the music of Mihai Vig. I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. Mihai Vig's music is it's extraordinary. It's truly extraordinary. There are things about it that, again, going back to this conceit that I have in terms of my own work, or my own experience with WERCKMEISTER Harmonies, which is knowing and not knowing. But even the realm of not knowing, there is a kind of intuition of kind of understanding and not at the same time. And the music helps me, enhances that feeling of maybe understanding a little bit more about the unknown, but also leaving some of that unknown as is. And that is a really, I think, quite a precarious balance to strike. And the music does it so well. I mean, there's passages of emotional power and beauty that really are so moving, that lead to moments of like aghast and horror. But I think that's how a work like WERCKMEISTER Harmony operates so effectively upon me. I think that is due in large part to how the music operates as well. So So this is a great interview. I should have mentioned here, I have it in my notes here. It's approximately 21 minutes. So it came and went so quickly. I was so absorbed by it. It just flew by. So I wished I was. I wish it could have been done in one of these long takes, you know, a la Werckmeister Harmonies or Tango or whatever. But so I could have gotten as much as possible. So much from the great, great artist that is Béla Tarr. Also, Béla Tarr does speak a little bit at the end about his career and how he sees his career, or how he saw his career, sees his career as a filmmaker before, but now what he currently does and engages with, and why he chose to do that. So that's also very fascinating. So I was so happy with this. I wish there was so much more. So I would have loved to have a whole hour, 2 hours of this conversation. It was so great. It's so wonderful. And I learned so much from this indeed. So this is the interview with Béla Tarr. This is approximately 21 minutes. So next, let's talk about the next supplement, which is here, Family Nest. So this is the work which is described here as released in 1979 when Béla Tarr was only 24. Family Nest, or again, please pardon me for my very bad pronunciation, but this is Chaladi Chuzfazek, is a Family Nest, is the director's first feature. Inspired by true stories and featuring non-professional actors, the film depicts the challenges faced by a young couple forced to reside with the husband's parents amid a pervasive housing crisis. So this is again described as being from 1970 or released in 1979. Béla Tarr's first feature film. I think when they were talking about it in the earlier interview, I was mentioning he was being 22. Here he described as being released when he was 24. And this is approximately an hour and 45 minutes or so. So it's a feature film length film. And it is great. This is so great. You're getting two films for the price of one, in a manner of speaking, because this is a full-length feature. It would have been wonderful if Family Nest had its own individual spine number with its own individual release. That would have been great, but that's okay. That's a very minor quibble, because I'm overcome with the power of this film and my excitement for the inclusion of this film for this, because it does a number of things. Okay, the film Family Nest, it is a really fascinating look into the lives of this family. We are basically thrust practically immediately into their lives, and so but we can understand almost immediately what the situation is, because it's essentially focusing in on this young couple. But it's not just that, because we have the parents, so the in-laws from the point of view of right, so the in-laws, or because it's the husband's parents, so it's the in-laws from the point of view of the wife, and so there's a little bit of tension there already. There are also other people in the family household as well, thus creating a very cramped experience, which we can get a sense of just by seeing how they all interact, you know. In the kitchen, or around the dinner table, and we see little jokes aside, or we see people in the background, some relatives in the background, maybe they're speaking. We get a glimpse of a little bit of their conversation there. They might be talking about something completely different, but then they might be laughing along with things, but there's maybe a little snicker, or a little sense of the tension because of the cramped space, because of the lack of privacy. There are also moments when we see people at work or coming home from work, and we can feel that weathered, tired feeling at home as well as speaking maybe sometimes directly to someone to the camera, or maybe off camera, expressing certain frustrations, or feelings at a given moment. Also, we get a sense of the application process for people trying to get government housing. So the idea is the couple wants to get housing in order to essentially be able to move out of having to live with the parents. And so this is, I think, a very family drama film, which is fascinating, because there could be moments of strife or fighting within the boundaries of the family unit itself, the extended family unit itself, as well as within the couple's relationship itself. And also, so it's a family drama in that way, and we also see the details of how certain people interact, and the way that the father interacts, the mother. It's great. It's really great, and really dramatic, and really quite absorbing in that way. There are also moments where we see how the system of the housing allotments might seem to be quite insurmountable, at least from their perspective. I mean, we get a sense of the system of credits and how these need to be accumulated in a certain way to express in a quantitative way the degree of need of a particular applicant for housing to begin with. And that is essential from the government's perspective, at least as they described it, because of the limitations of how limited housing is to begin with. So it becomes a socio-economic issue, as well as being a kind of social crisis. And we get a sense of that. We get a sense of the interaction with the government person, and then the application process, and sort of the frustrating way in which the questions are being posed, and sort of the insurmountable aspect of this, and how many years it will take before eventually they'll be able to get housing on their own, etc. You compound that with the economic situation in terms of their own jobs and their own job security, working class, hard labor in a lot of aspects. So what are the prospects of being able to live upon independent means given these contexts? Perhaps quite slim, and that itself is a very dire or potentially dire type of story to be told, or set of stories to be told. So in that way, this film Family Nest is very compelling, and it's also very compelling on this a multifaceted viewpoint, which is very much akin to Werckmeister Harmonies, watching it through different lenses, socio-political, geopolitical, but also on the very intimate and personal. And I think that is very much the case for a film like Family Nest. This is a great and bold film, and it feels very fresh in that, again, much like how it was described being made in the supplement, the interview. It was a lot based on improvisation, spontaneity, but it doesn't feel forced. I don't know how it feels very organic. The conversations as I see them, they feel very much natural to the setting. They don't, in other words, I don't get a sense of any kind of halting or stilted nature to the way they're speaking, at least in terms of the way that I feel like I'm hearing their conversations. But rather, it does feel like they are responding to each other. The frustrations seem to be coming from a place of realism. When they're speaking to the camera, when we're catching them in moments when they're by themselves, we can feel that it's coming from a place that's something that they themselves, the actors themselves and the filmmakers themselves, they understood. So, and indeed, when we recall some of the comments from Béla Tarr in the interview, he describes how he could understand certain elements of the characters of Family Nest in terms of, for instance, maybe wanting to get higher education, his own personal story, but maybe being encouraged by government officials at the time to forego that and instead work in sort of fairly harsh labor conditions in sort of working class environments. And so a type of discouragement of higher education from his vantage point anyway, I think is reflected in certain ways in maybe the backgrounds and lives of the characters that we meet in the film Family Nest. And that's, I think, an example of the semblance of realism, or the source points of realism that I think feel like are being engaged with as the characters talk and speak and interact as I watch them in the film Family Nest. So it's wonderful. And also I love how this is included because, as I mentioned before, and as it was mentioned in the interview, this feels like a very different film than Werckmeister Harmonies on the one hand, but there are so many similarities. And then the more that one watches Family Nest and Werckmeister Harmonies, you can see that there is a sense of, again, the spontaneity of the situation, the way that they have a kind of there are details in the periphery that we don't quite know. I mean, there's sometimes the conversations within Family Nest, sometimes they speak about things that are not quite part of the context of the overall film, So there are things that we know and yet we don't know in the film Family Nest, but we can go along with the compelling aspect of their story all the way. And so I think a similar type of feeling, as I've tried to describe it, is definitely the case when watching Werckmeister Harmonies as well as the use of space and time, as I suggested in the earlier interview. So this is so essential to have as part of this. Again, you're getting two films for the price of one. a wonderful example of Béla Tarr's work. I mean, from this early, quote unquote, early period, his first feature film, so very important to his filmography overall. And itself, it's such a compelling family drama and also social political drama. And also, it's a great counterpoint to Werckmeister Harmonies, and also a great parallel to Werckmeister Harmonies. And so you're getting so much with this. And so going back to that conversational point about how maybe on paper the number of supplements with this release might seem disappointing to some, and if you feel that way, I completely understand. And I too wish there could have been more in terms of supplements. I would have welcomed more supplements, like a commentary track or something, which we don't get here, unfortunately. But the fact that we're getting this interview and then Family Nest, which is itself its own film, I think it's cause for celebration. And through this, part of the journey of supplements for me anyway, has always been, what can I learn about this film and about this film? How can I learn about these films? And again, it's leaving me, of course, curious for more, but I'm left in a position where I do learn a lot about Werckmeister Harmonies and about Family Nest, more than I feel like I knew prior to watching the films or prior to watching the Criterion supplements. So I think if that's the objective of supplements, then these do their job wonderfully. So I don't want to take anything away from the supplements that are currently existing within this. They are brilliant, and they teach a lot. And especially the film Family Nest, that itself is its own cause for celebration. So just keep that in mind, please. And so in that way, you're getting two films for the price of one, and it's a really great film. So Family Nest is included. And then round it out with the trailer, which is also a great inclusion as part of the supplements. But again, the interview with Béla Tarr, and then the film released in '79, Family Nest, and then the trailer. So that's what you're getting here. Once again, it would have been nice to have had more, but what we are getting still is, I don't want to take away from the greatness of what we're getting, which is all in all quite fantastic. So please keep this in mind when considering whether or not to get this release from Criterion. But from my point of view, I'm very glad that I could watch this interview and then watch Family Nest in the context of watching Werckmeister Harmonies, but also in its own on its own merits as well. So well done. And then to round out our conversation on Werckmeister Harmonies, let me now turn to the contours of the packaging and the Criterion physical media release itself. So I have this the plastic case with the fold-out leaflet. I just point out I like the black and white tenor of the cover art, capturing a moment from the film. And I just want to mention in terms of the art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Seelman, designer Polly Dedman, and art production coordinator William Braze, and art assistant Julie Sussman. So I like this very much. This is perhaps it's one of the most famous shots of the film. It's one of the famous moments of the film. It's one of the most mysterious, elliptical, and provocative moments of the film as well. Or it's dealing with one of the things that's so mysterious and strange and beautiful and wonderful about this film, which is this idea of this eye, and what this seems to indicate, and how this character on this side of the frame here is reacting to this. So it's a really great moment to be captured. So this is very much emblematic of the film itself, and I like the use of the font, Werckmeister, especially the way that the S and the T right there seem to be hooked or in a sort of curl, which is really interesting. And just before I continue, just looking at the insert or inside here. So there's the excuse me here. There is the inside. So we have an image on the inside part of the plastic. This side obviously would be where the insert would be housed, which is like this, and I've just removed it. I'll talk about it momentarily, but I like how they have images on the discs. So the 4K UHD disc is on top, so you have one image there. Let me just take this out. You have another image, which is for the Blu-ray. So I like it when Criterion puts different images on the discs. Very minor detail, but I enjoy it when Criterion does that. So, or slightly different way that the Blu-ray disc looks to the 4K UHD disc. So I just like that kind of detail. Now going to the insert, which is, as I mentioned before, the fold out, and it is, I fold out like this. I'm not a fan of the poster type. I don't like the poster type because I prefer booklets. I really do. If Criterion wanted to do posters, I would suggest maybe having a booklet and then maybe having a separate poster, which could be a fold out. So you have two inserts. You'd have the booklet and you can have the fold out poster. I would actually prefer that. That would be much better. But I don't want to take away from the actual poster art itself, because it's another representation of something that we see in the film, and what looks to be something like a circle or an eye, maybe, I'm not sure, I'll leave it at that. Again, if you want to watch the film, you can definitely do so, but it's another great, very important image from the film. And again, the font here is great. So again, I don't like this insert style itself, but I'm very much taken with the artwork and design and the way that it's capturing the images from the film that are very symbolic and very important, or possibly so anyway. And then also I just want to say, give a great endorsement of the essay, Dark Side of the Earth by Dennis Lim. It's a really wonderful essay. I've read Dennis Lim's writings before, and so this is yet another example. It's so easy to follow, wonderfully easy to follow, and fills so much information. So just knowing so much and presenting in this wonderful, easily digestible manner. That's the great thing about this essay, Dark Side of the Earth. WERCKMEISTER, Harmonies, Béla, Tarr, Hranitzky, and also the way in which the sort of artistic choices really enhance the watching of the film, socio-political considerations, if any, and the like. So my strong recommendation is watch the film first, and then you can read this great Dennis Lim essay. So it's called Dark Side of the Earth. So please check it out if you can. And that concludes my thoughts about the Criterion release of WERCKMEISTER Harmonies here. So again, I'm going to emphasize once again that I'm not an expert when it comes to this film, and I'm not an expert when it comes to Béla, Tarr, and Ágnes, Hranitzky, and the works of Tarr in Hungary, etc. So I'm not at all an expert, but I have seen this film a number of times, and now thanks to the Criterion Collection, I've seen this work yet a more number of times. And I'm struck by it on a kind of interpretive level, and also on a gut feeling level, and also just as a film that just washes over you and just seeps into you, and you're drawn in. And again, things that you know and don't know become a frightening and magical and quite unreal swirl of a cinematic experience that I think invites many a rewatch indeed. And that's the power of this film. I think it's a great example of the power of Hranitzky and Tarr. This is the work which is WERCKMEISTER Harmonies. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including WERCKMEISTER Harmonies, including the other works of Hranitzky and Tarr, including other films in the Criterion Collection, and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.